one thing I want to try to do is we have a set of questions we're going to walk through everyone here. We're going to kind of go through a little journey of what is it like to have AI in a compliant-based environment, what it's like to have the controls might need to be in place for places that are a bit more controlled than the average place. But if you have questions, we have a series we're going to try to get through. But if you have anything you want to talk about, I don't know if Deshaun showed up or not. I want to use his favorite thing is he'll invite you to eat, but if you leave hungry, it's your own fault. So ask questions. We have people here who are actively engaged with lots of organizations in different ways and in different stages of the AI journey. So feel free to add anything to this if it helps you, because that's the whole point. We want to make sure that this is helpful for you. And we don't need the slides, but if we get them, it'd be great. So anyway, I'll go ahead and just kind of get started since we have just a moment to talk while we're getting those things together. I'm David Zenzian, for those who haven't met me before. I pretty much lead most of the security conversations around Tanzu. So if there's anything you're doing with the Tanzu platform or Tanzu data products or even Cloud Health, any of our Tanzu features of products, and you deal with the compliance, security, risk, privacy, global standards, because as we all know, it's different in every city, state, country around the world, which makes that more challenging. I'm here to help with that. So AI is just one of these technologies that's coming to the mix that doesn't change our requirements. It just makes it more interesting. So I'm here to help, and anything I can help with, so feel free to reach out, and I help where I can. So why don't we go through and just introduce everybody here? Do you want to start with Banu over at the end?
I'm Banu, and I'm a field CTO for a financial services company. And I've been with many clients across the different industries over my 25 years of, or 30 years of, work, if you will. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rachel. Hi.
Can we get a mic check?
Hello. Okay, I'm just going to project. I am Rachel Stevens. I'm the research director at RedMonk. At RedMonk, we track technology industry adoption trends and try to figure out, in particular, how that affects the practitioner.
Hi, I'm John Durko, product architect, container platforms at Fiserv. So at Fiserv, we've got about 40 years of experience providing payment and other fintech services, and protecting the data we're entrusted with has always been core to what we do.
So hopefully we have as you can see, a wide variety. One thing I wanted to have when I was asked to help get this panel together was a chance to bring people from not just within industry, but those who are around it and supporting it from different places, because one thing that's different about this new technology change with AI is I think it goes back to the idea that software runs a world. We all have software in different places, and AI is just like that. You're gonna have AI for your SOC, you're gonna have AI for your operations team, you're gonna have AI for your call centers, your customers. Every single system you've been working on building for the last 40, 50, 60 years, they're all gonna have AI soon. And what does that really mean? And it gets even more challenging because, as you heard, we have a couple of financial, and Rachel, you've probably worked with a lot of financial customers, so you know their world a lot. But it's similar to any other regulatory, DoD, finance, they're all the same when it comes down to it. They're worried about their customers, they're worried about the data, the integrity. And there's a set of controls, and it's difficult to bring AI into that world. You're gonna have, strong policies, or how do you have the governance? And I want to kind of get a chance to go through each of you and understand how did the people you work with, the people you hear stories from, what are those sort of things that bring up, how did you introduce AI? We knew it was coming. We had a bit of visibility about it, but we all were shocked as it came out. And how does that fit into the standard ways you're doing things, or did you have to change the way you do things to bring AI into that world? So I'm gonna start with Rachel, because you have a big view, and then we'll kind of go around and change each question.
Yeah, so if you think back to the industry, we've been kind of doing like the big data since Hadoop days back in the early 2010s, and the concerns that we had then were like the 3 V's we had like variety, velocity, and volume of data were all the things that we talked about then. Those are all still the same concerns now, but it's just coming in a different flavor because for how long have we said we're going to try to make data-driven decisions in the enterprise? That's something that we keep talking about over and over again. And it is a little bit of the siren call of how are we supposed to actually do that? And what Gen AI did was bring kind of a democratizing access to this data. So we have basically made it so that everyone in our organization has the ability to query our data now. And so it's kind of this promise that we've been working on for more than a decade is starting to come to fruition. But at the same time, we're still having all of these same challenges that have plagued us all this time ago in terms of our data quality, our security, our access controls. All of those are still in play, now just even more exacerbated.
So, John, I want to come to you on this one because data is in financial services, it's a really interesting story. It's sort of like if you get into the federal or the military, it's like segmentation of data and rights and access and privileges. I'm sure you have a lot of policies around who can use data, where it's at, how it's put together. How has that driven that story of that governance model around Pfizer?
Yeah. So as I mentioned previously, for more than 40 years, we've been in a business where protecting the data we're entrusted in is job one. And so we're fortunate in the sense that the governance policies, the mindset, the technical controls have really been there for a long time. And as Rachel mentioned, Gen AI in a way is just a new twist on other ways. And in our case, I think of it as a machine learning journey, which really started about 2015 at Fiserv. And again, so it's a matter of figuring out just where to host that data so that you're hosting it securely. Obviously, encryption often plays a big role in that. But the key, the fortunate thing at Fiserv is that these controls already existed. Tweaking them for new technology so far has not been that great a challenge.
Bon, have you found a similar thing in the financial companies you work with? Are they able to use the existing ways of approaching governance and security, or has it changed with the introduction of AI?
I think it has changed dramatically for financial services industries, at least from my perspective, because most of the companies that I worked with, they have implemented AI/ML, right? And they have been implementing AI/ML with proper governance and with proper, deploying the models, serving the models within the data center, for example. But now with Gen AI and ChatGPT or Gemini, for example, data has to go out. All the queries have to go out of the data center, right? Now, this actually changes the security posture dramatically for these enterprises, right? And so they have to relook at not only what the person is sending or what the worker is sending out, right? So they have to basically track those and also the output that comes out, right? And so there is a very, so this has become literally stressful for these financial services companies and some of them I worked with, they're trying to go back to the older mode and not use Gen AI at all, right? So there are certain companies who have just stopped leveraging Gen AI and said, okay, let's think a little more deeper into how to enable these interactions within the company. And so that's what my experience is. It's mixed in terms of some people are going all out and saying, okay, use Copilot, go against a public LLM, public API, and just make sure that the data that goes in is not anything proprietary or PII related. But the checks and balances are slow to follow, and it's all based upon the company's posture towards that kind of a security. It is slow, but getting there. Yeah.
And while I'm getting ready for the next question, do you find that the policies and the way they approach that are different for internal-facing apps, or what about for customer-facing apps? Is it more availability to use that data internally for modeling and making plans for the product and business, or is it all the same? Is it just one policy across the whole thing?
So the policy differs. So in financial services company, in any, whether it's Fiserv or Charles Schwab or JP Morgan or anybody, there are customer-facing apps, right? That basically banking apps or where the customers use, and you create a chat for that particular app, right? So you can use an LLM to do it. Even there, you got to make sure that what is being inputted and what is the output of the LLM and the input to the LLM is properly governed, even if it's from a customer, right? Because whatever the customer is proprietary data, right? So it's PII data. So it's, for example, a customer wants to know what his account balance is and what he has to do with that balance in terms of either to put it in stocks or put it in some kind of a bond or some kind of an instrument, right? All of this is personal. Now that is going into a public LLM, and that gets recorded in the public LLM, and it can be shared across. So you got to be very careful in basically governing that kind of a conversation, right? So it is, and for the internal teams, right? For the internal teams within the organization, it also is the same thing, right? In terms of what data you send to the LLM. Okay, for example, if a developer is creating a product that is basically a chat product, for example, he's a banking application again. I mean, what data he sends out and what data he receives needs to be governed again. So it is for both external and internal. This issue is, but for the internal players, it's much less because, for example, these are developers who are working on chat apps. But if they are working on internal apps, maybe there is no PII data being sent over, or not any proprietary data being sent over. As long as it is not those kinds of data, you're good, right? For example, you want to do AI ops and you want to have Gen AI chatbot across AI ops. The only thing you need to be worried about is, are you masking and sending the right amount of data, and have you masked it? Have you encrypted the data and then send it out to the LLM for just getting analysis of what's happening? Is my server up or server down? So there are different use cases within internal, teams, if you will, versus external teams, right? External customer-facing apps. Customer-facing apps are having more PII or proprietary or personal data that needs to be governed more versus an internal application. So it depends upon the grade of internal application, right? If it is a customer-facing, if a developer is creating a customer-facing application, then he has to be worried about governance. If he's just writing a ops kind of a chatbot, he doesn't have to worry that much because you can be sure that not all data is PII, and it's already protected from an internal sources perspective. Yeah.
And John, we've talked about this before. Fiserv has a wide variety of products. So it's both cloud or on-prem. Banks use them for various things. And as you said, you have a big history of compliance and strategy. I'm imagining that you probably didn't see much change in those processes in your world. It's just followed the same thing. It's just a new technology introduced to
Yeah, I think that's very true. In some ways, I liken this to our adoption of public cloud, where even today there are services. We have tenants in all of the major hyperscalers, but there are various. We have tight control over the services that developers can consume. So we're not leaving it to the developer to kind of decide, is this service safe? We have, again, as part of our regulatory process, a review of these services, how data is handled. And in some cases, those services are not available for use inside Fiserv, or they're available with some sorts of controls. So that's really the same thing here. And, we don't have our developers, even if they wanted to, could not easily go and hit the public, AI models. However, those models can be hosted internally, and I guess again, it's the scale of Fiserv that's enabled us to get ahead of that and provide those internally hosted models, so that we can have a solution that meets the greatest thing. The demand, obviously, for access to these models is huge. So we've been able to get ahead of it and provide secure ways to host those models.
So interesting how the different approaches are there. And I'm assuming, Rachel, you've seen same answer across all of your customers. It's both either conservative or more just,
Yeah, it really runs the gamut based off of what your use case is and what you're trying to do. So we have people who are building internal AI applications. They have people who are building customer-facing applications. We have people who are just trying to incorporate AI tooling into their SDLC. And so what you're trying to accomplish and how you're trying to accomplish it really kind of changes what your posture is.
And I felt the similar thing. In Broadcom, I've been working with a lot of our teams on how do we, because we're in a unique space in Tanzu. We actually produce software that other people will use to build AI tools. We build software that helps enable AI in places, but we also have tools that use AI in our products. So most policies are built around that third use case. So I've run into that interesting place, which comes to our next question, is really around the development. We've done a lot of changes over the last generation-ish of how we approach developer enablement, getting the tools in place, the whole shifting left thing that happened. Things in my security world, we're trying to make that easier because we have better visibility across all of that. But we already know security teams are overwhelmed. We already know that they can't handle doing code reviews across all the applications. Now we're having AI writing code and AI being part of it. How are we seeing that developer enablement? Is that really changing the way we approach making software and including AI either as a part of it or consuming it? And Rachel, I know that developer enablement is one of your favorite topics. So I want to give you a chance to dive right in.
It sure is. So one of the things, like you mentioned shifting left, and I absolutely agree that security teams are overwhelmed. And at the same time, so are developers. We are increasingly asking our development teams to do more and more of the things that historically had discrete functions within the SDLC. And so we have to have kind of this empathy for what is it to be a developer who's suddenly being asked to be developing secure by design applications. And the only way that the developer can do this, and given that their domain is not security, is if we have baked in secure guardrails into the process. We have to make secure things the easy thing to do. So one of my very favorite quotes comes from Avi Douglin, and he says, "Security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security." You have to be able to make it easy for your developers to do that. And really, like, what that comes down to then is developer experience is security. The way that your developers use your product and use it well, that needs to be the secure way for them to do it, and you need to make it easy for your developers to do it. And so a lot of that comes into secure defaults. What is your platform and your system built in to make things easy for your dev teams? And ideally, that's where you, instead of shifting left, you're spreading security across your entire organization.
And so, John, from your world, is it a very similar story, I think, from what I've remembered working?
Yeah, so I think so. And I've just recently here, I've been able to spend some more time with one of our lead developers that I had worked with early on the Cloud Foundry product. And the primary use case in this is help with code refactoring. Mm-hmm. And, I got to learn, a little bit about the way they've been able to use Gen AI with the code refactoring. And it was fascinating to hear the success he's having generating test cases and having the AI iteratively improve these tests to provide more code coverage. Now, one of the challenges there is there are still needs to access additional sources of data. So we are actively now looking at MCP and what deploying MCP servers inside Fiserv might look like. So that's sort of active work right now. But again, developer enablement, whether it's writing new code or in some cases a substantial amount of refactoring.
And I'm sure, Bono, at Fiserv, the security teams, myself, I have background in financials for a long time. We didn't like the name of the department, and no. When you're overwhelmed, it's easy to say no to stop things. So, speaking on behalf of the security community, I know we're trying to enable the business. We're trying to move things forward. Bono, do you see that helping with the developer enablement? Do you see the security fitting into the governance of those guardrails for the developers to go faster?
So one of the things, I would use an example. One of my clients is basically, or customers, are moving to Copilot, right? And there is a very frenzied adoption of Copilot across the organization. And within a few days of launching, we had at least 50% of developers within the organization leveraging Copilot. So what does this mean, right? Yes, now once you have Copilot, the developers have the ability to write code faster, right? But you got to also look at, the whole life cycle, right? As John mentioned, right? And Rachel also mentioned, the entire SDLC process, right? Writing MCP servers for all the touch points within SDLC, that is up and coming, and the organization is still adopting that. But right now, people are just coding and then and basically generating applications. And one of the things that they and it also helps developer productivity improvements, right? So it really developers are more productive today versus what they were before Copilot and before that LLMs, if you will. So that is what I'm seeing from that. But you also take a look at the future, right? In terms of as and when agentic AI comes in, you don't write code anymore. The agents write code for you and deploy apps for you. At that point, the whole paradigms will shift, right? And you will look at a different way to run your old developer. From a developer velocity perspective, now you got to have two sets. One is from an agentic perspective, where the agents are going to develop and deploy code. And then from a developer perspective, who may tweak the agentic flow or the agent code and maybe write some pieces of code. So as we move forward, 5 to 10 years from now, you got to think about how the development world will change and makes adjustments as we go along. Yeah.
Is it okay if I ask a follow-up?
Oh yeah, go ahead, yeah.
So one of the things that we have been seeing a lot in terms of tool adoption in AI is that the most mature place right now is in that coding assistant area. So the co-pilots and things that are helping with code generation. They're the people who are skeptical of the glorified autocomplete, but it's a lot more than that. And it is helping us get code and applications written more quickly. But one of the things I'm curious about what you're seeing is a lot of the SDLC behind the code generation has not kept up with this increase in volume. So we kind of have this glut of code that's being created and made, but the rest of the pipeline still kind of has those same bottlenecks and throughput issues that they had as before. So what, if anything, have you seen in terms of we have all this code coming in and then I feel like we kind of have that and now what question?
Yeah, that's interesting because I addressed it in my my talk yesterday about generative AI and SDLC process. Yes, now there's going to be a lot of code being dumped in GitHub, and all these codes go through the process, and that will create a bottleneck, right, in your DevOps. So how do you scale your DevOps systems and your deployment systems? How do you scale your AIOps engines to basically monitor all those deployments, whether it is test or dev? So that's going to be an issue. But how do you address it, right? So you got to add more resources to be able to address it, or you address it through agentic approach, right? So that will basically automate the entire process, the entire SDLC process. So those are some of the options that you could use, but of course there is going to be bottleneck. You need more hardware and you need more resources to be able to accomplish, the plethora of code that is coming in, right? So yes, that's a problem, and that's another area where we should also look into when we are architecting the end states, or that are the systems, if you will. Yeah.
Is that approach similar for you? You get that usage consumption over at Fiserv? Because on my side, it actually is a good cue up for our next question, which is, guardrails and platforms and how those can actually help that work. And I'm not just saying this from a Tanzu point of view. I've mentioned to the team here as I was listening to my regular podcast, and I listen to a lot of security podcasts. A lot of them are talking about the fact that you can't have success in this space if you don't have the modernization story already started. You can't just go from hey, we have monolithic, let's just start bolting on AI. It's going to have problems. You're going to find your access controls or permissions, or some data is going to leak somewhere. You're going to have some problems with that. So you have to have the supports of a guardrails or some sort of system around enabling that massive amount of code to come into the system. We'll come back at another point and talk about how does that affect the security reviews, because that's a whole different story, because now a lot of code that's written based upon models of code that wasn't the best to begin with. That's another story. So from the point of view of making that developer story go faster, generally we have platforms and guardrails and tools to make that work. And those folks here know that we're part of Tanzu. We have our own story. We can talk about that later if you want. But I want to hear from each of you. And John, if you want to start, where do you see that helping?
Sure. So we're still a bit in an infancy there as far as using some of the platforms. Although we did have an interesting demo today, and because we are a Tanzu Platform customer, the Tanzu AI, I'm not sure the exact product offering there. It opened my eyes up to possibilities where it doesn't mean we're installing GPUs in the hardware in our Tanzu foundations, but allowing those AI services access to those models to be something in the marketplace, and then perhaps the actual model again is running internally, but maybe on a different vendor's hardware, which is in the case right now we are putting a substantial amount of hardware on-prem, running various flavors of Kubernetes that will actually provide run the models. But again, things like Tanzu Platform are providing some interesting ways to gate access, but provide access to a wide range of developers to what's still a fairly limited pool of on-prem resources.
And you have a lot of products. So you have a lot of different use cases around that. And Banu, I'm sure you have in your own financial customers you work with that same, nothing, we would love to have it all around Tanzu. It'd be awesome to see that. But reality is you're going to have your old Oracle, you're going to have your mainframes, you're going to have hundreds of different types of systems. Do you find having the platforms and the tools to make those work together makes it easier for the adoption of AI in a model that solves the regulatory concerns too?
AI actually creates a problem rather than solving a problem, right? So what does Gen AI basically mean, right? So you're asking a ChatGPT agent to give you an answer and advice on a specific question, and it looks up on the public database and comes back with an answer, all right? So that is what a Gen AI does. It doesn't bother about what the enterprise does until you give it context, like a RAG or something to that effect. Now, given that context, right, so you have all of these applications within different kind of disparate applications. You have SAP, you have mainframes, you have legacy Java apps, legacy C++ apps, and C# apps. Not all of them are basically enabled with AI from the get-go. So you got to actually bolt them with or try to add AI to it. But how do you add it, right? So that is a problem. So right now, what I'm saying is only modern applications like Spring or C# applications or Python applications have that capability of engaging with an AI, right? So, for example, you talk to an MCP server and get it, while others are still not there yet. So that is what I'm seeing. Right, but again, LLM has created another problem, just like what other technologies had created in the past, right? And we need to find a way to solve that, right? So we cannot migrate out of mainframes as soon. It's not going to happen. Okay, and even though people say, some companies have. I understand, Some companies that I worked with in the past have tried it, and they have successfully modernized their mainframe application within a 5-year time period into a modern framework like domain-driven design with Springboard as a backend, right? But not all have been successful, especially in the banking industry. Mainframe is the backbone for every banking and financial service industry, and enabling them in AI is going to be a big problem. Unless, how are you going to do it? And these, if you look at it, the mainframe systems in these banking industries are core platforms. And they have a lot of proprietary and PII data, right? Enabling them with an AI chatbot, for example, to look at that data is going to be a problem, right? So how do you address it? And one thing that John brought up is to basically look at deploying your LLMs within your premises, within your data center. That will solve a lot of problems rather than sending information outside. Try to contain the information within your data centers. That will actually really help and move you along towards adopting AI much faster. Right. That is what I would recommend. Use on-prem LLMs. Deploy LLMs within on-prem. They are good today. These LLMs are fast. These LLMs have the same amount of reasoning. They have same amount of inference power with a VLLM or Olama, for example. Yeah, that would be the way to go. And once the companies start adopting on-prem LLMs, then you'll have a faster adoption of that, across the board.
Can I offer one follow-up?
Oh, definitely. Go ahead.
So one of the benefits of attending these sessions and also the CTAB is some of the people that Broadcom VMware make access to. And so yesterday I was in a discussion and talking to James Waters about some of these questions. All right, okay, well, we've got the LLM. People are talking about, well, how do we take that and make it agentic? And the questions then, they get a little boggling. And James, the just incredibly bright person he is, threw out the idea that it's important to still break out the LLMs as a core, a probabilistic engine versus a deterministic
is another.
And adopting AI doesn't need that that solution that maybe it's an agent has to be 100% probabilistic, right? You could use the LLM to perhaps narrow down, pull together other sources of data, but then feed that into a trusted deterministic final decision-making engine. And that may be one of the keys to figuring out how to adopt not just full-on AI, but AI to help inform a trusted deterministic model.
Yes, that's another aspect, right? Deterministic model, right? Deterministic answers rather than a probability of 80%, right? So you need, that's another angle that we got to look at, right?
Yeah, so Rachel, I think we came roundabout from your question to kind of answer, how do you approach that acceleration into a platform approach? And I'm sure that you've done a lot of writing, a lot of research through the years. Are you seeing that similar model across a wide variety of organizations you work with?
Yeah, I would say the way that you have to think about it really is going to be like platform, people, and process. And so platform is going to do a lot to help you with like codified best practices, equal self-service access for your development team, governance and orchestration. Like all of those things are crucial for being able to do this, but it's not going to solve all of your problems alone. It's like you still, like if you're having tons of data silos and you can't get all of your teams agreed, like that doesn't fix it if you have no access to like shared data, or if you're having like, I loved there was somebody who was telling me that they had a RAG built off of their SharePoint site. Like I've been a SharePoint site administrator, like that stuff is 20 years old sometimes. So like if you have bad data coming in, that's not going to, that doesn't fix your AI. Like you still have to have the people process part in place, and then the platform can help actually pull everything together for you.
So do we have anybody in the audience that actually is also in financial services or any regulated industry? Can't see any hands, so I'm assuming there's somebody out here. But from that point of view on the regulatory side, John, I want to start with you on this one because I know that you and I've had this conversation before, and I've spent too many times talking to regulators. They're great people, but new tech. I remember, just right before I joined Pivotal years ago, working with a bank trying to teach regulators, well, how does orchestration work? How does that new modern technology work? Because there hadn't been new banks in a couple of years, and now we have AI. So I'm imagining, I've not met with the regulators because I'm not in that space anymore directly, but have you found under the regulatory scrutiny, do they understand it? Do they have the right models and context? Is the conversation happening at any level at that point?
So I think I'm sort of in the same boat as you right now, in that have not been having direct discussions with the regulators about this. The key, as we talked about, is that right now all the access to the models our models we're all running internally. Mm-hmm. So we can say definitively to our regulators that we're not leaking data out as part of prompts to public models, that sort of thing. I think the regulatory bit will start to get more interesting again as there's more of a push to agentic. And if this agent is making a decision that could impact a client's access to his funds or things like that. Now the similar thing is that what we've done with machine learning and with some of our partners in the anti-fraud space, right? So there is sort of a lot of history. At the end of the day, the last thing we want to do is label a transaction as fraud when someone's stranded at a gas station without anything except their credit card, trying to get back on the road. So there is some, past technologies that propose some of that similar problem. But in the AI space, I'm not aware of a lot of talk with the regulators yet. And I think they're going, as we found with PCI for container platforms and things like that, it's going to take them a while for them to come up to speed as well.
Well, I'm hoping with that, I'm not sure, the whole FFIEC changing to NIST-based. So we've actually internally started looking at the NIST AI framework, which just came out. So if anyone's looking for things, NIST has a framework that came out, and you can look at kind of the guidelines of what the U.S. federal and.
Do you have that in a vector database I can query?
We'll get one for you. We'll definitely get one for you. But Rachel, it's like.
Yeah, I was also just going to share as a resource. It's called the AI Alliance. It's the alliance.ai is the website, and they have a trust and safety security working group, and they have gone together and assembled a whole bunch of different frameworks that have started to come out and resources on terms of how you need to start thinking about those things. So if you're looking for kind of like a centralized starting spot for some of those security questions and compliance questions, I would recommend looking at that as a starting point.
Yeah, from an agentic AI, right, and the way the agent responds and what time it takes for an agent to respond to a query, that is important. With the prior ML models, especially in fraud, for example, these ML models were able to evaluate a particular situation and give you answers in a deterministic time period. When you go to agents, right, that particular time-based response is not going to be pretty, right? So you got to take that into concern too. Of course, you add the regulatory checks that you need to put on that agent to basically then have the agent verify whether the input and output to it is matching the regulatory framework is also going to take some time for it to respond. So from an agentic approach, it is going to take time, and you got to understand how much time it takes for an agent to respond, and use that as a metric when you're developing and deploying agents, for example. But there is another pattern with Anthropic has just released recently. It is called the orchestrator worker pattern, which basically bounds all the agents that are doing work. They are called workers, and you have an orchestrator. That model will help reduce some of the risk, especially when it comes, you can have a worker that checks for a regulatory framework, and then whether the question and answer question and the response meets that standards or not. So you can have multiple workers in a bounded manner to get you answers in a timeline that you would prefer, right? Agentic is autonomous. So you got to think hard before you implement an agentic approach to any of your, applications within an enterprise. But yes, from a regulatory framework perspective, look at orchestrator worker pattern as an approach that will speed up things. And that's my advice from that.
So I personally am looking forward to the agentic and or more MCP, but taking the services in the back end, the things that actually run and tie these together, and actually getting those accessible to the tools of the teams in the company who are using them. And that's still would overlap regulations because you have control requirements, access controls, rights and authorizations, and it's more than just the vector. How do you have the proper tagging so you can know the right data around it? And I want to kind of step into the next thing, which is really, what are we really seeing as you're really getting to the real world? What are some lessons learned? I want to spend a few minutes. We have only a few minutes left here, but I want to make sure we can kind of lead into any questions people might have about, what are we seeing in the real world? What are some actual wins and scenarios? I want to start with you, Rachel, if you can.
Sure. So I'll share just one of the things that I have found most resonant. So I'm sure everyone in this room is technically savvy. This is the group for that. But if you ever have a colleague or a boss or someone who needs to understand what agentic is, the best way I've found to describe it is like 100 LLM calls in a trench coat. And that helps them kind of get at what the problem is. And the problem is that you have to be able to think about access and authentication and like a machine to machine at a high volume way. You have to think about rate limiting. You have to think about how you're going to have cost controls in place if something goes rogue. You have to think about what happens if one of my agents starts to have an issue, how that can have a cascading effect. So like, what does my lateral traffic movement look like? All of those things are really important to have figured out, and helping your boss understand, like, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? That's one of the things that I have found is like the metaphor that has resonated most with the people I've talked with. So that was my real world AI win, was having a silly metaphor.
So, Bana, are you finding similar things in your?
I agree that one of the things you brought up is around, if there is an agentic flow, if one of the agents stops to respond or takes time to respond, the entire agentic flow is, takes its time or may fail. So yeah, those are some of the things that I've been advising clients on, trying to make sure that they have backups or backup routes when they're designing agentic flows, so that, for example, if one of the agents is taking time to respond, you can ignore that answer and go to another, parallel flow or an agent that can give you an answer faster, for example. So that is some technological, interventions that you can make in an agentic world to ensure that the responses come to you at the right time, and also a proper validation is also taken into concern, if you will. All right, that is something,
Can I add one more? What you made me think, so starting points that I would consider is, one, do your current systems have the ability to fail gracefully? Because if you're starting to increase the volume of everything that's happening, that's one of the things that's going to matter most, is like, can your system fail over gracefully? And then the second one is, do you have granular enough access controls in your current state? And so starting to think about granularity of access and system failover are going to be two great starting points if you're starting down this path.
And if you're building from that, I'm assuming you're also going to have large-scale environments, microservices, and debugging this could be interesting. But John, in real world, I mean, you have probably a wide variety of good and bad stories. So anything in your real world things that you can share to help the audience here get a good step forward as they get into AI world?
I mean, it's a good question. A lot of this is still early days for us. I think internally there have been some great the user groups and the internal camaraderie around. There's been a number of people setting up training sessions and hackathons and stuff to just help people get comfortable with, how do I get access to a model, but it's an internal model that I just want to play around and have an example where I'm doing a simple RAG with some additional internal documents that I want to make easier for our developers to find when consuming our platforms, that sort of thing. But there are, I believe, still a lot of questions, about that trench coat. And I don't have all the answers here. What I would say with respect to, talking about the time it takes for models to respond, in architecting systems at Fiserv, it really, we very clearly delineate what is in the payment or auth flow, right? And introducing anything that might cause delays, inside of that. Well, I've just, swiped my, whether it's my Apple phone or my credit card or whatever, there's an expectation that, that payment's going to go through within a couple of seconds. And so that does limit what we might do in the payment flow. But then there is so much more that, as a financial technology company the size of Fiserv, that we do that isn't held to those response times that we have when we're right in the middle of a payments flow.
Good point, but when it comes, that is what you're referring to, I feel it's more towards AI ML implementations, right? But when it comes to LLMs and agents, it's going to be non-deterministic. You cannot guarantee that the answer will come back in the right spot. So that is something I feel that is important to consider, right?
So I think it's to me, it's one of the regulatory side that gets really interesting. If you've not worked in the regulated financial space, when you talk about risk It's not necessarily like cyber risk. That is one of them, yes. But it is, as you mentioned, it's the risk to that payment. It's the risk to the transaction. It's the risk to the customer not getting what they expect from the financial transaction they're doing. And it could be everything from I have an equity line, or it could be any financial transaction. So ML, let's not forget that AI has been around for a long time. And the use case of ML is really well established, and we have good patterns around that already. And hopefully our walking through this is helpful for everyone here. And I see we have a few people leaving, so I'm assuming they don't have any questions. But if someone does have any questions, we do have a few moments. We can answer any questions. And if you're looking forward to trying your own AI, I did share the link of the AI starter kit. If you want to grab a picture of that, it's a download you can get for the Tanzu and start playing with AI in your environment. And if you are in a secured environment and have questions about how do you consume and use AI, reach out to me or to any of the Tanzu people and they can get a hold of me. And happy to help you work through that process there. And we have the survey and stuff. But thank you for all of your attention. And I guess we don't have any questions. So.
No.